Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and I'm very happy today to be with Carey Wedler. And welcome to another pod shoot. Now I'm going to start off with this introduction that I think that recently, who showed me a video Carey made was the founder of BitChute, Ray Behe. He sent me a video of yours, and I liked it very much. I checked out a couple of other your content, and I liked it very much. And then I asked them, can they see if you would be willing to have a conversation with me? And here we are. I also said, why is this name familiar to me? Okay, so I checked emails. In 2019, I had recently moved to LA from New York, and I've been somewhat retired for quite a few years, and but always looking for interesting things. I came across a piece you wrote, you authored, and I actually sent you an email. You were with Anti-Media. I don't know if you were the founder or one of the founders of Anti-Media. And so it was in March of 2019. I sent, of course, send an email. I probably ended up in your spam box because, I'm not in your contact list. I mean, nobody really knows, especially back then, who I was. Because I had never invested in anything that anyone in the public would ever know. And so I basically wrote a very brief email saying I read one of your pieces, and I think the publication was FEE. I really liked what I read. And I was in LA. I had recently moved. Your operations were in LA, and I was hoping to meet with you and your team, and I would consider making an investment. So,
oh my goodness.
So I wrote this in 2019. I never got a response.
Oh
So I
man.
probably ended up with in your spam box. And also, so you would know that I was a real human being. I sent you. I sent you an email of a talk I gave on Bitcoin, and also a talk I give on the Council on Competitiveness in DC, where I also talked about Bitcoin. So you would know that I was a human being, maybe not necessarily legitimate, but a human being. So after all these years, I'm really happy that now we're getting to meet each other and have a conversation.
Oh man, me too. I'm so sorry I missed you. That was about 5 months after we were banned. The Anti-Media was banned from all the from Facebook and Twitter, which was our main source of reach and revenue. So I had gone on with Foundation for Economic Education, which is probably that's FEE where you saw my article. But I think I was still reeling from that loss, and we shut down operations on the Anti-Media because we lost all our revenue. But I'm so sorry I missed you.
Oh, no problem. I don't live in LA anymore, so
that's a good thing, I think. Had your little time here, and now you're gone.
So what happened in what happened in and if you don't mind, I'll tell a little story. I don't think I've told it yet to this audience. Maybe I'll bore you with my LA story. But yeah, I'll start off boring you with my LA story, and then we'll get on to you.
Okay.
When I moved into LA, someone I know. And I always tell people I'm Jewish. The people who this person who I knew is a Muslim woman, and she had friends, and I had just moved to LA, and I had known her also because she had heard me talk about Bitcoin, and we became friends, and so she invited me to this Shabbaton. That's a Shabbos dinner on Friday, and half the people there were not Jewish. So it was just meant to welcome people who had recently moved to LA. So I'm with a group of 14, 15 people that have recently moved to LA. So so the host, very gracious host, comes in and then says everybody should introduce themselves. So the first person introduced, and given where the host started, I would be the second to last person to introduce myself. So going around the table, and somebody was saying, "Oh, I'm so and so, and I love to be involved in philanthropic activities, and I love to give and give." And then everybody, so it was about everyone was a virtue signaler and trying to top everybody else. at who was better at virtue signaling. So basically, I listened to 15, 20 minutes of each person talk about how wonderful they were, how virtuous they were, and none of them believed in for-profit activities. And basically, the only pleasure they had in life was whatever they've accumulated was giving it away. So it came to me, and I said, now I know why I was invited to the Shabbaton. I said, you're all gonna, if it wasn't for me, you'll all leave very unhappy. And why is that? You all like to give. So if you all like to give, you need somebody who likes to receive. So I can tell you, I'm here to fulfill your happiness for this evening, because now you have somebody to give to, because I want to receive everything you want to give. I'm as happy receiving as I am giving. So I like to give, but I also like to receive. I like to receive as much as I like giving. And so you all seem to not like to receive, and you all like to give. So you need somebody who likes to receive. So I'm here to fulfill your evening so that you can feel really good about yourselves. So, and also, I don't believe in non-for-profit activities. My activities are exclusively for profit. So, so after, and everybody took like 20 minutes. I took like 3 minutes to say that. And about 15 minutes later, the dinner ended because suddenly everybody realized they had some engagement.
Oh, no.
and everybody left. So when my friends asked me, when I went back to New York, and my friends saying what it's like to be in LA, I said, this is my LA story. Okay.
For sure.
My LA story is everyone you want to meet is going to virtue signal and tell you how wonderful they are. So, and none of them have a sense of humor.
Yeah. Sounds like you got a little too real for Los Angeles people.
So that's my my LA story. So let's hear your story. What was anti-media your first? What did you study, and what did you start out doing after you studied?
Yeah, so my LA story, I was actually born and raised here. Just both my parents are from the Midwest, and they ended up out here. And I came from a on the left background, not talking like Hillary Clinton type of left wing, but like, principled progressives. And I studied history in school. I went to UCLA out here, another public school. And at that time I was very much, progressive, liberal minded. But the cool thing about that is that when I got out of college and I started questioning the biases I had received, the history education stuck. So I had all the information and all the facts, and I was able to incorporate them into my emerging worldview, which was very much not on the left anymore, not on the right either. But I was inspired by Ron Paul, of course. He was the first one who sucked me out of my, I had been a very enthusiastic Obama supporter, and I became disillusioned, and then I found Ron Paul. So he didn't quite suck me away from Obama, but he absolutely challenged my framework of what I had been taught was right and civilized and all that.
What attracted you to Obama, and then why did you become disillusioned with Obama?
Yeah, well, it was his anti-war rhetoric. So I came of age around 9/11 with all the wars, with the Bush-Cheney neoconservative dominance. And I was raised by parents on the left, so they were very much principled in their opposition to war. So I came up from I don't think this is a good idea. These invasions, we're not talking even like drone strikes, but like the way Obama spoke about these wars, he promised to end them. And I found out later he had actually voted to fund them when he was in Congress. Of course, I didn't stop to check any facts or to check his actual record because his rhetoric was great. So I went with the rhetoric, and it was 2011. And so he had been president for a few years. And I started to wonder, what's going on? I always thought of myself as aware and awake and all that. And I realized I didn't know anything that was going on. I didn't know what the person I voted for was doing with his power. And as soon as I started actually looking, at the drone strikes, at how he had filled his administration with Wall Street, I saw there, the cracks started to show in the facade. And then in came Dr. Ron Paul. A friend showed me his videos, and that was it. I was going ever since then. And I started making YouTube videos for Ron Paul to start actually Google Ron Paul. And, and I was so excited. I thought he could win in 2012. And then that was a big step when I saw how the media treated him, how the Republican Party treated him. That was another step in my radicalization, and eventually I started making videos more consistently on broader topics.
Are you referring to the moment? Well, there are many moments, but the moment where he was booed when he talked about being anti-war, and
I remember that
the audience booed him.
Yeah, And I love how he doubled down. The one I'm thinking of is actually 2008, before I even knew about Ron Paul. I saw it later, and he was talking about interventionism, and Rudy Giuliani tried to call him out, and Ron Paul was like, no, absolutely. Like, he just would not submit to the dogma. And it was so inspiring to me. That alone was something that really encouraged me to speak out, just seeing someone speaking truth to power and not caring how it was received and sticking to his principles. And so that was a huge factor in how I ended up doing what I do.
So initially, it was Ron Paul that really attracted your attention. So you went from a family of principled progressives into an even more principled libertarian.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how did the relationship work out when you started this? Did you start discussing politics and your evolution with your family?
Yeah, I came in guns blazing, and it did not go very well at first. I came with a lot of judgment and honestly condescension. And I've learned maybe in direct person-to-person interaction, that's really not the way to go. So my parents are very supportive, and they like my videos. They're not quite sure on how it would work to evolve past government, but they get where I'm coming from. And over the years, conversation by conversation, as I mature, as I learn to be calmer and how I interact with them, we're slowly making progress. It's definitely a long-term evolution, but I'm grateful they support me, and they've never shunned me or kicked me out of the family for having, the weird dissident views.
And how did anti-media come about?
So that was founded by two people who are both my good friends now. Also both inspired by Ron Paul, and they met online, and they started with a meme back in 2012 around the election between Romney and Obama. And I think the meme was just, it was like a list, and it said, I'm voting Republican, I'm voting Democrat, or I don't watch TV. And the I don't watch TV was checked off. And it was just a viral meme, and they decided to start writing articles. And then in 2014, I blowtorched an old Obama shirt I had. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to get like 20,000 views on this video. It's going to be crazy, because I was just starting out then. And it ended up getting picked up in a lot of the just mainstream Republican circles. And the video went probably more viral than anything I'll ever do again. And it made its way to the anti-media, and they found me, and I did an interview with them, and it was written, and they were like, oh, you can write. So they brought me on, and I ended up editor-in-chief, and I was with them till the end when we were banned in 2018.
And what caused it to be banned?
I would love to know still. I just
what was the nature of the content that was being produced at that point in time in the anti-media?
Yeah, so it was very anti-establishment. It was not left or right. We applied the same standards of our values to all politicians, and that included violations of civil liberties, corporatism, corporate welfare, the military-industrial complex, police brutality, just kind of the bigger, broader picture of like, what are the real root problems here? And for us, it was, well, government. Look at all these policies and look at what authority does. But we wrote a lot of just straight reporting on these subjects. A lot of times there were op-eds. A lot of what we did was we called them counter narratives. So if the media was really pushing a particular narrative, we would try to come up with a counter to that of like, what's some missing context here? How could we present this in a way that in our view points out what's really going on here, what levers of power are really trying to do, and trying to see past the massaging that often happens in the mainstream media.
Yeah, and that was specific, exactly the type. But at that point in time, when I was moved to LA and trying to figure out, what should I do to kind of keep myself busy? The thing that I'd always been interested in is some sort of citizen journalism platforms that would basically do more investigative work and more neutral in its reporting of news. And while people say they don't like the uniparty, but basically people support uniparty news channels,
of course,
or just the two-party news channels, and they don't want any alternative version. They want a simplified version.
Yeah.
And mostly they want fiction, not facts.
Right.
So they just want to confirm their prejudices. On the most part, they want to yell at the TV and say, I'm 100% in agreement with that,
right,
or yell at the TV and say this person is a moron.
Right, exactly.
so either that's the experiences they want in front of the TV, but rarely does anybody want to sit in front of the TV and actually learn something and hear a different point of view. So, so I was very interested in trying to figure out, maybe if I could, I wasn't interested in doing it myself. I was beyond the point of where I was interested in being an entrepreneur again in my life. I was hoping to find somebody who was an interesting entrepreneur, and I could write a check and have some limited participation in the project. So and what you were doing and what Anti-Media doing was really caught my attention. So Anti-Media got deplatformed. So what was next for Carey?
So then I moved on to the Foundation for Economic Education, which I'm so grateful for. We actually, their content director at the time, Dan Sanchez, had been writing for us. And so it turned out to be a very helpful connection for me. And he's a wonderful, wonderful writer. And he brought me on in the content department. So I did some editing for them for a while. I hung around with them, doing all kinds of like social media content. I'm sure you saw one of my articles there. So I was writing for them. And I kind of had to catch my bearings because the Anti-Media was my dream job that I didn't even know was my dream job. I had just started off with anti-war activism and Dr. Ron Paul's vision, of course. And I didn't really stop to think about a career path. I just thought, I see so much injustice in the world. There's so much violence. There's so much corruption. I just feel like I have to say something. So it was kind of like flying by the seat of my pants. I wasn't trying to make it a career. And then it just sort of beautifully unfolded the way it did, where I found the Anti-Media, and it did become a job. It did become something that I could do every day, that I was committed to and I cared about. And I think best used my skills, which are very much like writing and verbal oriented. I don't offer much in the realm of technology or any disruptive tech like that, but I can write and I can edit. And so I felt so lucky to have that. And losing the Anti-Media, especially when we'd had no prior notices that we were in violation of any platform rules, it was really a shock. And it wasn't, because, we had seen the crackdowns coming. We'd seen the way the narratives were going about disinformation and fake news and Russia. And we thought we had more time, I guess. Like, we knew that there was censorship coming, but we didn't think it would be right before the midterms in 2018. So I spent a lot of time just trying to land on my feet, really, and figure out what was best for me and what I wanted to do. Because it was a bit of it's a punch in the gut when you spend years building something. And it seems like people want the information. We had over 2 million followers on Facebook at the time, which was the main platform that everyone was getting their news from back then. So it was quite difficult to put in so much time and energy and blood, sweat, and tears. And then just in a day, just poof, you're gone. Because it was Facebook in the morning and Twitter that afternoon. And to this day, we don't know. It wasn't mentioned in the Twitter files. That was never addressed when they did all that reporting when Musk took over. So to this day, I have some suspicions about who it was, but it really felt kind of like now what? Why bother? They can just shut us down. So I've spent a lot of time kind of rebuilding my intentions and why I started doing this in the first place 13 years ago. So it's I'm now on my own.
I think the people that I think Musk probably, it's not like Musk opened up everything. Musk opened up selectively, which I think is a dishonest practice. Cherry picking. I don't have a lot of respect for cherry pickers.
Yeah.
So so I don't respect cherry picking.
Yeah.
And then I think the people reviewed the files. They took a cherry picked files and they did further cherry picking.
Right.
So, so we really don't know who all the people who were involved in trying to influence the content on Twitter. So we don't really know. They don't want us to know. And there doesn't seem to be evidence that those that looked at the files had any curiosity beyond what they saw. I don't know if you know that that I was in 2020 I was actively engaged in Parler. I don't know if you know the platform Parler, Parler. Parler was it was a platform that was very much identified as a MAGA platform, but actually everybody involved in Parler. Well, the initial funder of Parler was Rebecca Mercer, and she certainly identified as a Trump supporter. But the person who founded it, when I spoke with him, he claimed he was a libertarian, and and I consider myself an anarcho-capitalist. I think that once there's government, to keep it limited is impossible. So
Yeah.
I think there's a delusion that thinks that once you start government, that it might start small and limited, but it won't stay that way. And
Yeah.
when by the time it gets to expand into a leviathan, there's nothing you can do to reverse that process.
Yeah.
And actually, most of the founders warned us of that.
Yep.
They basically said, "Here's the republic. It's your job to keep it. We're kind of
Yeah.
skeptical you'll be successful at it." I think people don't realize
Right.
that most of them were actually skeptical of the
Yeah.
success of the experiment,
Yeah.
and did a lot of urging of the people to be very
Mhm.
vigilant, in preserving it. And they were very explicit in basically saying, if certain things happen, you're going to lose your republic. So
Yeah.
be ever vigilant, and we haven't been very vigilant.
Yeah.
So we've lost the republic. But so I basically decided that libertarianism could not be sustained.
Yeah.
So if I had a choice between a government that would eventually become a leviathan, and a little bit of the chaos associated with anarchism in a capitalist society with their property rights,
Yeah.
I much prefer anarcho-capitalism than I do government. So I prefer the absence of the state than the existence of the state. So and I strongly believe that. And then the person who I had suggested, who became the chief policy officer of Parler,
Mhm.
was an objectivist, very influenced by Ayn Rand, and she had been married to one of Ayn Rand's most influential disciples.
Oh, wow.
So she got very exposed to Ayn Rand's ideology by
Yeah.
meeting somebody who knew Ayn Rand very well and was a colleague of Ayn Rand. And she had on her social media platform, she was a never Trumper. So basically, there was no, Trumper on Parler, even though most of the community was
Right.
Parler, because basically, the way I described it when people would interview me, I'd say, imagine that a store only has, a Walmart. So Walmart, every time you go in and they tell people wear blue shirts and red shirts. Everyone that wears a blue shirt gets a hug and a kiss coming in, and they got a speed checkout line. And the red shirts can all shop, only nobody's hugging and kissing them. And there's no the speed checkout line, so they have to wait longer lines.
Yeah.
So, but it's the only store in town. Okay. So next, Target opens up, and says, you don't need to wear any shirts. We're hugging and kissing everyone that comes in. Okay. And we have an expedited checkout for everyone. So we're not distinguishing. So obviously the red shirts who are unhappy at the other store that they start out, they go over to a new store that treats them well. And the other people who are happy where they are, they have no reason to move over.
Yeah.
So basically, the Parler became a MAGA platform, by consequence, not by choice, because it basically was a neutral platform.
Yeah.
And so only people who were unhappy on their platform experience, came over to Parler. And Parler became in 2020 the most downloaded app in the world. So more people were downloading Parler, than any other platform. And then Parler also got, after January 6th, Parler was accused of being a co-conspirator in the insurrection.
Yeah.
And Parler got deplatformed with over 20 million users.
Wow.
So I've been through the process of being completely deplatformed, but is in the Twitter files, one person makes mention of a statement made by a senior person at Twitter saying something like, I can't remember exactly, but it was something like, once Trump's removed, we must make sure Parler suffers. Okay.
Oh my God.
There's a quote out there. So there's probably got to be more material related to it.
Yeah.
And the person who was the chief policy officer of Parler told me that she had reached out to people who had access to the Twitter files.
Yeah.
And none of them would speak with her. So she said, "Can you tell me, is there any more stuff on Parler? What was going on with there?" And apparently they had no interest in talking about what more might have been on Parler, nor even talking about Parler.
That's
Somebody
crazy.
somebody who had 1,000 followers who was a MAGA. That's a catastrophe that they got removed.
Right.
But the deplatforming of 20 million people, they had no curiosity about,
Yeah.
refused to speak about, and wouldn't even speak to her about it. So again,
Yeah. And I don't,
everybody has an agenda. Okay.
right. And I think what's confusing to me is I don't get how it hurts the new X agenda to talk about something like Parler or the anti-media. Like as far as I can tell, it fits the narrative that, oh, the left is bad and the left did all of this. And look at how people who didn't fit into the left wing box were treated. I don't know. Like, I can't figure out why they wouldn't want that information to be public.
They want the public whatever serves their interest.
Yeah.
A report came out. I was reading just a little bit about the report, a summary of it. I think it just came out the other day. I just saw it this morning, and basically it tracked the behavior of X post the Musk endorsement of Trump, and they see that there seems to have been a lot of more visibility of certain content, and a lot less visibility of other content. The type of things that basically MAGA was complaining about what Facebook did in 2020. I guess people are now cheering that Elon Musk has done the same thing that Facebook and other platforms did in giving preference to a certain ideological content. But I can tell you one thing. I can tell you one thing that I'm sure is a fact. The type of content that you produce, or I don't really produce content outside this pod shoot. That's de-emphasized on every platform. I mean, we're discriminated against everywhere. So
yeah, it's funny because I've had to, like, when I first started doing this, it was like, I'm right and everyone else is wrong, and you're all, and I still think that, but like, I've had to really come to terms with the fact that my beliefs are not the dominant beliefs. Like, I've had to learn to, like, just find ways to connect with everybody, because if I don't, I'm going to be so isolated, and I still disagree with their ideology and what, we may agree on an end conclusion, but the philosophy justifying it is probably very different. But I do try to have more empathy for people I disagree with. Honestly, like, it's a selfish thing. Like, I need peace. I need to be able to decompress and to not just feel like the entire world is against me and there's no place for me in the world. And it's been helpful to learn to do that. But then when we talk about things like this, it is a reminder of, like, oh yeah, if I ever want to really, really grow my following, I'm going to have to sacrifice my principles, which I'm not going to do. So I've been making peace with the fact that maybe I'm just in a smaller corner of the internet, and that's okay.
Yes, I think that's what I've recognized a long time ago. But I've never wanted to have any sort of social media presence. I mean, now I do these pod shoots, and I get to have conversations with wonderful people like you that I find really interesting, and I have fun doing. But it's not like I think any video I do will ever go viral. That's not the case. So and it doesn't bother me that that's not the case, because ultimately, if you're in order for people to share your content, you have to be part of their tribe.
Right.
So they only support members of their tribe.
Yeah.
So if you're an individual, by the definition of individual, you're not a member of any tribe. You're just an individual. So, you hope that somebody else who's also an individual sees something and appreciates individualism and will share it because they want more people to see. But the likelihood is of any one of those who believes in individualism ever having major platforms, that's not the case, because people want to talk to people who are members of a tribe, who are their tribe, who they identify with, their tribal compatriots. And not, I think it was Ayn Rand said that the smallest minority group is the individual, and who needs the greatest protection. And we're given the greatest protection, by the definition of inalienable rights and a limited government, that have been taken away, is the individuals. So party identification has pretty much destroyed the individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's such a problem with the level of identification that people have with political parties and politicians. It's like the whole Murray Rothbard Anatomy of the State. Like, no, I'm not the government. And he has, I don't, have you read Anatomy of the State?
Of course,
Yes.
yes.
I didn't want to assume, but it's more, I feel like it's insulting to assume you, or like to not assume you have at this point. If you're
I studied at University of Chicago.
Oh, okay.
I knew Ayn Rand. I knew Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
I knew Hayek.
Wow.
So
Oh, I bet you've got some good stories.
I'm fortunate. One of the benefit of my age is I got to meet a lot of people. I was in
Wow.
Chicago in the 70s, and so a good period of time to be in Chicago and getting exposed to great people who supported capitalism and
Yeah.
individualism and
Right.
freedom, political freedom and economic freedom. And my interest to go to Chicago was first provoked by reading Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom. But by the time I got to Chicago, I was much more interested in Hayek than I was in
Nice.
Friedman. So and then Hayek was very generous with me.
Wow.
And and then I started reading a lot of Mises's work,
Mhm.
and I became familiar with people like Lysander Spooner, and then I read everything Rothbard wrote. So I read almost everything Ayn Rand wrote,
Yeah.
and eventually, I began to also learn how to think for myself.
Right.
So along the way, so did Ron Paul lead you to Rothbard?
Oh yeah, totally. Down that, because it started off with, I actually wanted to be a constitutional lawyer when I was studying history. I took constitutional history classes. I loved the Constitution, and I feel that it did summarize a lot of important qualities of freedom and things that uphold it. Obviously, I've found Lysander Spooner, and I've evolved past that, and Murray Rothbard. But I went from really wanting to uphold the values in the Constitution to slowly starting to understand that, along the Lysander Spooner lines, like that's not possible. And it's really beautiful the way they articulated things in the Constitution. And I think a lot of them had very sincere intentions. It just, it didn't work as evident. Spooner was writing about this back in the 1800s, and he was decrying that it had already failed. And now here we are all these years later, and it's only gotten more glaring. Like, I think if Spooner could see what the government has become, he would just be like I would love to see a book or an essay from Spooner today, or Rothbard today. Just how, as you were saying in the beginning, there's no such thing as a limited government. If there is a government, if there's power, the nature of it is to expand and to seek more of it. And the same for the people who seek that power in general. Obviously, that's not true for everyone, as I'm talking about Ron Paul. But overall, the vast majority, I would say, with very few exceptions, whether it's people or just like the institutions themselves, they're going to grow. And the Constitution has not been able to limit that. So I went from Ron Paul to questioning the media to Rothbard and Lysander Spooner. And I haven't looked back. And I try to, sometimes I try to pause and be like, okay, let's check our assumptions. Let's check our framework, or do we still believe this? Is this still true? Has anything changed in current events or history that would make what I believe to be false? Not for me, but I do think it's important to second guess yourself and to really check your biases, because as an individual, as someone who isn't really driven by top-down narratives, or at least I like to believe I'm not, right? There's always an unconscious part of self that can get jerked around by the narratives and the Edward Bernays types of the world and people who followed in his footsteps. But I think it's
also University of Chicago alumni.
Yeah. Oh man, I find him to be so fascinating. Just objectively. I mean, and also the way he perceived himself, because I don't think he thought that he was exploiting anyone, or that I think he thought he was helping democracy, which again is just more argument against it of oh my God, look at how people can co-opt it, and they convince themselves that they're doing good, and their intention is well, let's take people's agency away. This will be better for democracy, which is fascinating to me.
Yes. And did you ever read any of the work of people prior to Edward Bernays, like Gustave Le Bon?
I did. I read The Crowd because I had read that it inspired him. So I was like, I gotta know what inspired Edward Bernays. Yeah, I could read that again, honestly. I read it maybe like 7 years ago, but I feel like some of these things are good to do refreshers on. And Bernays himself, he has great tips for spreading ideas and getting people to believe them. Like maybe I wouldn't do it for like the United Fruit Company and the CIA. I would like to use the tactics for something more humanitarian, but I think they apply regardless. Like he inspired Goebbels in Nazi Germany. So there's a universality to what he was talking about that, obviously Nazis, not great. CIA upending other governments, not great. But I think there's something to be said for how those ideas can be applied to anything. And if they're virtuous values, if we're talking about liberty and freedom and individualism and empowering people to think for themselves, I would love to figure out a way to apply his ideas for that.
Yeah, when you have success at that, let me know, because I've been a failure at that. So,
right? Well, it's interesting too, because it's like, well, how do we take writings and maybe teachings? I think he thought of himself as a bit of an expert who was teaching people with his writing. Like, how do you take intentions and strategies that are really rooted in disconnecting people from agency? How do you use those to give people back their agency? I don't know. So it's just, but I feel like there's got to be something in the things he talked about, even if it's just find your target audience, figure out what matters to them, and find a way to express it in a way that appeals to them and makes sense and fits into their existing worldview. That's, so far, I'm kind of just like a sledgehammer with expressing how I view the world. But I think there is something, I would love to learn more about practical applications of his teachings.
And now, how much? What are the things that are arousing most of your attention right now? As we've seen the early transition process, what are the things, as far as someone who's a lover of liberty, what are the things that you find most disconcerting of what you've seen so far from?
Well, it's funny. I've been getting a lot of pushback on X because I haven't just fully praised the new cabinet. So I think it's a bit problematic with you got I think it's Mike Waltz, and you got the John Radcliffe and the Brian Hook and the Elise Stefanik. And if you look at them, a lot of them are Bush administration alumni. A lot of them are Mike Pompeo was tweeting that they were great choices, which I think should give everyone pause. And so I'm not great with the neoconservative appointments. And I think it could be worse with RFK. Obviously, his approach to helping people improve their health is not mine, because it's big government strong arming. And I think the best thing that could happen is he uses it as a platform, like Ron Paul did. Like, he has this position of authority. Maybe it's just about getting the word out and helping elevate these issues, as opposed to using government to change people's behavior and to force these companies to comply with certain standards. I also wonder, though, because given all the subsidies for these things, a big talking point now is seed oils, but the government subsidizes to a great extent the crops that are used in seed oils. So I'm curious how that's going to pan out. It just seems like a lot of really possibly good seedlings of ideas, but like then the fertilizer is toxic. So I'm not like, it's easy to get excited over something like an RFK appointment, and it's definitely a shakeup of the status quo. But if you look at the levers of the machine, I'm not sure that that's what can he do. And I want to be proven wrong. Do I, though? Because do I want the federal government managing health? It just seems like a lot of conflicting interests, and I'm curious to see how that plays out, because you have someone like RFK who's very skeptical of biotechnology, and then you have other people who are being included in the administration who invest in biotech. So it'll be interesting to see how these interests play out.
Yeah, I kidded when I saw the picture on the flight of Trump and Musk and Don Jr. and Bobby eating Big Macs there, and I sent some friends of mine who are in the health field. I said, is a new saying, not an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but a Big Mac a day keeps the doctor away. So well, Bobby looked a little uncomfortable in that.
He did, yeah.
But I guess he was there eating it. So you gotta go along to get along, or whatever the expression is. So I mean, I don't believe in doing that, but that's why few people would want to be affiliated with me.
Right, exactly. And it's like, it's hard to imagine, like, why. So full disclosure, I am from LA, born and raised Valley girl. So when you hear my that is my dialect. So I apologize. It comes out quite often, but it's, as I was saying, it's just interesting to me. Why would you campaign on Make America Healthy Again and then parade that you're eating McDonald's in front of the world? And I get it. It's like, okay, that's the food you have on the plane. That's fine. But why would you promote that? That doesn't seem like good or who is that for? It's not for the Make America Healthy Again crowd. So who are they presenting that to, and for what purpose? I'm very curious.
Well, I think pretty much they think they get away with everything because so far they have gotten away with everything.
Right.
So given the fact that if your lifetime reinforces the fact that you get away with everything, then you actually begin to believe it.
Right.
And basically it has been, in the case of Trump, that's been the case. And so why not keep doing what has worked for him, for almost 80 years of his life.
Right.
So,
and people love it. It's like they love, I don't know if they love the contradiction, but they love, I think it's I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but they love that he doesn't care. He just flouts everybody's expectations. And I get the appeal of that. For me, looking at the actual policies he's implemented and the actual people he's putting in power just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't line up with the renegade quality he's cultivated for his image.
Well, I was interviewed once on TV, and when it was sort of like it was a mistake that had happened. I was some guy who was creating this crypto project that I didn't even like very much, but I liked the topic of the press conference, and the press conference was on data sovereignty. So I've been an advocate for data sovereignty, and this person had a project that I thought was a lousy project, but at least he was highlighting the issue of data sovereignty. Yeah. So he asked me to appear on a panel, and one of the advisors to his project was the woman from Cambridge Analytica.
Oh, wow.
So so after so during the panel discussion, I called Zuckerberg a data rapist. Okay. So I said what Facebook does is data rape. It's a form of rape. It's a form of rape. And I looked up the term rape on in the dictionary, and I said, am I using a precise word?
Right.
I contacted a couple of friends of mine, female friends of mine, and I said, if I use rape in this way, are you going to be offended? And then I read them the definition, and they said, well, I might be a little offended, but given the fact that you've read the definition, I could see why it's an apt term. And I know you're not using it to be insensitive, to women that have been raped in a different way. So it's a different form of rape, but it is rape. And I like using strong language. So you don't get people's attention if you don't use strong language on things that you think should get people's attention.
Right.
So after the show, after the panel ended, MSNBC was going to interview this woman from Cambridge Analytica, and somebody came over to me and said, "We'd like you to appear on the segment with her." And I said, why? And I said no. And the person who sponsored the event pleaded with me to do it. So I finally said, okay, I'm going to do it. So I wasn't really happy about doing it, but the sponsor was like begging me and from the event, and he had put all this money into doing this, and I just felt I couldn't say no. So I get on the show, and I realized that really the first thing they first open up with her, and then they ask me, and the first thing the guy says to me, who's interviewing, and I'm not seeing him again. I've never done this before. I'm looking at a camera. I don't know who the fuck I'm talking to. So I'm just hearing a voice and staring at a camera, and I've never done any television or any media before. I'm already feeling a little uncomfortable. The person immediately starts saying, Jeff, I understand you used the word data rape. So date rape, I mean. So data rape. So he had said it, so there was no. So I said, okay, why is he saying this? It's because he wants to portray me as a lunatic using these choice of words.
Yeah.
So he had already said it, so I didn't even respond. I just stayed silent.
Wow.
So he got very uncomfortable because I felt the silence, and he didn't know what to say next. And then immediately it became sort of adversarial, our conversation. So, so after, a few months after that, somebody came to me because they wanted me to financially back this candidate. So they basically wanted to have somebody do a whole PR method to make this candidate more national exposure. So they wanted me to underwrite this process. So I spoke to the person who they wanted to do. I wasn't convinced. And I spoke to the PR firm and I asked them, tell me how you do what you do. And so they started telling me. So I gave them a copy of my video and I said, okay, what's the impression you get of me when you see me interviewed? So you saw me. This is the only place I've been interviewed on TV, MSNBC, or CNBC. It was CNBC. So I said, this is the only. It wasn't MSNBC. It was CNBC. It was a business channel, and so I said, what impression do I convey when you see me talk? And they said, very, very easy. We watched you and we said, you just don't give a fuck what anybody else thinks. So I said, good, that's the impression I want to give. Not taking an effort into giving it. It's just who I am. So I think being in this business that you and I are in, of being an individual, being libertarian, promoting liberty, if you need to be in a mental institution if you cared about what people think.
Yeah, right.
Because nobody you meet will ever agree with almost anything you have to say.
Yep. It's a good practice in like really connecting with yourself and your inner voice. Because I feel like I went through a phase where I was trying to tailor content around, what's this group going to think? What's that group going to think? And I have to add in that line to address what that group's going to react or how they might react. And I think it's important to cover all your bases and to make the strongest possible argument you can. But I've had to kind of let go of this tendency I had to let other people's perceptions and biases influence the way that I expressed myself. Because as much as I care about the values that I've been promoting for, oh my God, it feels like forever. It really wears on you, but it's worth it. And it's I'm going off on a side tangent. But not as much as I care about the values I'm promoting, I think it's also important to be true to myself and how I express myself. Because if I lose that, what's the point? Like part of this, yes, I do this for humanity as much as I can, but I also do this for my own sense of justice. I do this because I couldn't just sit silently when I looked at how messed up the world was and how everything is upside down. And if I lose that authentic voice, then I don't think it's worth doing anymore. So it's been a lot of growing pains and evolution over the years of doing this. And the older I get, the more I'm like, yeah, I don't care what you think. I'm just going to have to say how I feel and what I have observed. And I'm grateful I even have an opportunity to do it after all these years with all the deplatforming and all the shadow banning. And I'm lucky I reach anyone at all. So one person for me, honestly, is enough. If one person hears what I'm saying and goes like, even just like maybe that's true. Forget like, oh yeah, this girl totally knows what she's talking about. Even just a tiny little crack in the programming I'm trying to break through feels worth it to me.
So what's your plan for yourself? What are your plans for Carey for the next few years?
Well, I just launched a Substack actually, and it's my first writing project since the anti-media was banned. So I've been really loving that. Speaking of being authentic and really letting myself be free to express my true feelings and beliefs, that's been so fun. So it's called Pleasure to Burn, which is a reference to Fahrenheit 451 and Montag when he's, it's actually the opening line of the novel. But I figured if I'm coming back after a very long censorship break, I'd like to, somehow Pleasure to Burn came to me and I love it. It's my favorite dystopian book. I read it in high school, actually. And of course, I didn't get a lot of context about the nature of government, but I'm glad I read it and it always stuck with me. So I've been doing that and just really rooting in my authentic expression. And not in like a coddling liberal type of way of, like that phase of parenting.
And are you trying to write daily? How much content will you produce on your site?
I'm doing about 1 or 2 a week because I found that when I overwhelm myself, I just do nothing and that doesn't work for me. So I'm trying to find a sweet spot where I feel fulfilled and I feel like I'm delivering on the content without going crazy and running myself into the ground. And I also make my videos as well. So I have to find a way to balance my time. But so right now it's videos and articles for me and just doing my best to reach as many people as I can, because I think it matters. as much as my ego can play into it, and of course everyone has an ego, and there's a part of me that, you know, I want my stuff to get views and this and that it's a human desire, but it really is, you know, I would like to see peace for humanity and the earth. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I'd like to at least be a tiny little crumb of contributing to hopefully a positive evolution of consciousness.
So when did you start the Substack? How many pieces have you published so far in your Substack?
I think I've got 6 or 7 up. I launched it about a month ago.
And what have you been your most recent pieces? What have you been writing about?
Yeah, what did I put up last week? Oh, this one, this one upset people on Twitter. I wrote an article about how Trump is the Obama of the right. Just in terms of like the fever pitch fervor people feel, to the extent that I don't think people who are really in the cult of personality are able to process a lot of information. And I like using myself as an example because I think it helps people let their guard down if you just come out and say like, hey, I believe things that turned out to be wrong and I was wrong, and that's okay. And it's actually very important. I think it's important in anybody's process and evolution to be real with yourself and acknowledge maybe I missed some stuff here. And so that was my most recent article, but I put out one for the election that I really loved. I don't know if anybody else cared, but I looked into newspaper archives from as far as back as I could find them in the National Archives where they've digitized newspapers, because I wanted to see like, when did this lesser evil argument come about? Because it's so every single election, we hear people saying they're doing the pragmatic thing by voting for the lesser evil. And I just was curious when that started. Oh my, it started in the early 1800s. You can find op-ed after op-ed after op-ed of people saying, well, I don't like Andrew Jackson, but he's the lesser evil to Madison. I think it was Madison or Quincy Adams, you know, but just going,
John Quincy Adams. Yeah, it was
yeah.
Quincy Adams.
And then, of course, you have people saying that Adams is the lesser evil to Jackson. And my point was just, 1, how long has this been going on? 2, has it worked? No, it doesn't seem like it. If 200 years later, people are making the same arguments and here we are, and every time the government gets bigger, I just thought that was really interesting. And I was just curious to see also what's so interesting is no one can agree on what evil is. How, you know, if everyone is convinced that their evil is the lesser evil, but they're diametrically opposed. Of course, I think a lot of their policies are the same, but at least in perception, they're diametrically opposed. Just the practicality of how this system works, I don't think it's very pragmatic. You can't agree on what evil is. Everybody is an evil to somebody, and there's always force involved. So no matter what, a bunch of people are going to be ruled by what they believe to be the worst evil. Anyway, I loved writing that one. I got to dig into all these archives, and I was just searching every election year. I was going through the digital archives and searching for lesser evil or least of 2 evils or a choice of evils. And it's crazy how much this is the argument. So I love that one.
What kind of, when people criticize you, what are the type of criticisms that you find kind of constructive, and what are the other type of attacks that you just see because you're identifying yourself as not a member of a tribe, and therefore you're the other, and you're the person who's a danger and a traitor to the country and the flag and everything it supposedly represents. So what are the type of comments that you're getting? Well, to get comments is a good thing. At least people are engaging with the content.
Right. So, and I figure if I'm getting upset comments, I'm poking at something in the programming. Even if maybe I'm not the one who's going to unravel it, I'm at least, there's something that I'm triggering a discord in somebody's perception of reality. And I think most recently, the biggest, I think, empty criticism I've gotten is, you're so cynical. You're cynical, you're black-pilled, you're negative, you don't offer solutions, which is why I launched my Substack with a very lengthy article on solutions. It's actually a 3-part article. Part 3 is coming soon. 2 parts are out. But I wrote that out the gate. I was like, now I have something to link to everyone who says I offer no solutions, which that's a whole other conversation on, like, I don't want to be a central authority on solutions. I don't think that's how solutions come up. But, it's good to have some ideas. I think the most constructive criticism I've ever gotten, interestingly, it's timely again now, but back in 2019, I went down to see Tulsi Gabbard speak. She was running for president and she was speaking out here in LA. And I just asked her a couple questions, and I thought overall she was fine, but silly me, I had not looked at her actual voting record in Congress. I just went on her rhetoric and general little things I knew about her. And I got several comments of people saying, like, Carey, you need to look into her foreign policy record. She's not anti-war. And sure enough, I looked it up, and she had voted to fund wars. She was never against drone strikes. She was very aggressive in her war on terror stance. And is she as bad as John McCain? I mean, I would say obviously not, but it was so helpful to me to be called on that. And I was so glad, because I really pride myself on fact checking and making sure I know what I'm talking about. And this one, I think I got a little excited of like, whoa, here's somebody, could she be like the Ron Paul of the left? And I got a little carried away, I think, with the, I don't want to say cult of personality around her, because she's not as big as someone like Trump or Obama, but she's definitely got a nice glow around her, of a perception of being a true fighter for freedom, and somebody who's really giving it to the establishment. And I was so grateful that somebody called me out on that.
But when people say give it to the establishment, really, I always say, what does that mean? You know,
Great point.
I always say nobody, nobody really wants this. I keep repeating, nobody wants to drain the swamp. They want property rights over the swamp.
Right. Exactly.
So,
exactly.
You know, I wonder how many people Trump is nominating in the cabinet where their job is actually to shut down that cabinet. So I think they're just there to run it differently than the other person was running it. But they want property rights over it, and this is just a fight over property rights over the swamp. Nobody wants to drain it, so they just want to own it and use it according to their own criteria. And the people who say they want the swamp drained don't want it drained. You know, they want it used for the purposes they want to use it. Democrats think Republicans are the enemy. Republicans think Democrats are the enemy. They both think each other's are traitors, and they're each going to end democracy. They each want to use the government to go after those that are a threat to, quote, democracy. So how interested are you in like the type of issues? For me, I'll never see policies that are interesting to me, because I don't want the government to have any policy other than to do nothing. So when the government runs and says we'll do nothing, that's the policy I like. Okay? So and it's interesting when I used to speak to people about hate speech, I said, you know what? And you made this point about what's evil and what the definition of evil is and what the definition of hate speech. And you made a point, that I paid very close attention to, where you mentioned the word coercion. So, for me, anything that's coercive in nature is evil. So, that goes back to the analogy that like Lysander Spooner used for the government taking property and money away from us, how it's even worse than the thief. The thief only does it once. The government comes back day after day after a day. So the thief will do it once and leave you alone, but the government is a recurring violator of your rights.
And they won't admit they're thieves. They'll gaslight you into believing that somehow they're working for you. It's crazy.
So I say, I view taxation as theft. So given the fact that I think taxation is theft, anyone who wants to tax me is a thief, and therefore anyone who wants to tax me, I think, is hateful and evil. So that's my definition. Now, few people agree with that definition. Then again, if you ask a lot of people about what their definition of any of these concepts are, as you already made, they'll disagree. They'll disagree on it. But all these people who have their definition of hate and evil, will all be supporting the concept of coercion. The question is who gets to be the person who does who gets to be the one who has the coercive force, and as opposed to who's the victim of the coercive force. So everybody wants to be the coercer. Nobody wants to be the victim of coercion. But most people want to have the right to do coercion, just not be coerced. Exactly. So that's the hypocrisy of 99 to 9/10% of all people. Is they want to be it's not that they're against coercion. They want to be the benefit of it. They don't want to be the victim of it. So, so I'm very interested in, because I think the only hope we have for making this system better is not by discussing much the policies, but by discussing procedures and process. So, when we talk about procedures and process, first we have this, idea of the administration to seek, do these recess appointments for apparently everybody in government. Is this a topic that are you talking about it? Are you writing about it? Or there are other topics that you find more interesting? Like that's the type of topic I find, particularly interesting.
Yeah, you mean just the way that they're trying to appoint so much of the cabinet without any like check or balance power through Congress?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that what's interesting to me is that the narratives have, and not just narratives, but the mainstream behavior and, the opposition to Trump, they have fed or played into his hand so well. Because if you're a Trump supporter and you hear Trump, who says he loves the Constitution and he wants limited government and the government's out of control, that you can be a Trump supporter and hear them say something like this, like, well, we're going to bypass congressional procedure. This needs to be done. And as a Trump supporter, you can go, yes, I want less accountability. I want less checks and balances or fewer checks and balances. And to believe that that is actually serving the purpose of limited government and scaling back the state, especially when you look at the way and also myself, the way people oppose Biden's executive actions, Obama's executive actions. So again, it's just coming back to this, like, well, it's like fine for me, but not for thee. Like imagine if the Biden administration wanted to do recess appointments. Imagine the outrage you would get from the MAGA crowd of the overreach and the overstepping. But because the media has in large part attacked Trump so much, because the left-wing establishment hates Trump so much, it's actually viewed as a necessity. Like, forget procedure, forget what the Constitution says. We have to do this. We actually need to have more authority in government through Donald Trump if we want to have more freedom, which to me, it just all unravels and it makes no sense. But I'm curious, what about it is so interesting to you?
For me, what's interesting to me is that what I mostly want government to do is to be a check.
Right.
So and the institution that was designed to provide that check was Congress,
Right.
specifically the House. So the House was closest to the people are supposed to check the House, and then the House can do effective job, supposedly, at checking everything else. And so, the only tool we had to limit government was supposed to be a system of checks and balances.
Right.
And that's been our greatest failure as a people, is that we have not supported the system of checks and balances. I've advocated for people who feel compelled to vote. I don't feel compelled to vote. I don't vote.
Yeah.
I think it's an exercise. I'm not going to waste my time voting to feel like it's going to have any impact on my life. So, and I would view myself a failure in life if what the government did had an impact on my life. And I feel that anybody, maybe people won't like this, anybody who basically thinks that the success that they have in life is a function of what government does or doesn't do for them, sorry, you're a loser, okay? You're a child, okay? So, and if you're a child, I don't care what age you are, you shouldn't vote. If you want to be when we do a tax return, they have something called a dependent and an independent, right? So you get a deduction for people who are dependent. So if you want to be a dependent, that's an infant, that's a child, okay? So adults are independent, okay? And we should live as independent individuals, as independent beings. And if we're independent, then we can basically do enough with our own life to make a reasonable success of it based upon our own effort. And there's very little that the government can do to interfere with us being successful in our life or not. So to the extent that people feel their whole future depends upon what government does or doesn't do for them, for me, those are dependent, they're children's, they're losers because they can't take responsibility for their own lives. Yeah. And I certainly don't want to have any of my money, taken that I worked hard for to be given to a loser and somebody who has no capacity for taking care of their own life. Okay. Their life is their fucking problem. Okay. So my life is my fucking problem. So, friends of mine early on used to tell me, good thing you have in relationships and friendships and all these in life is never make your problem somebody else's problem. So I think that's like a good process. But what is government? Government's about making everybody your problem, everybody else's problem.
Yeah, right.
Socializing problem. It's about making everything a collective. And people here and they make fun of, I don't like socialists. No, most of the country are socialists because they want to socialize every fucking problem. They want to socialize it and have a collectivist solution to every single problem. So while people here sit back and say, I don't like socialism, I don't like communism, this and that. No, this is what people are embracing. They're embracing the idea of the collective, and they're punishing, the objective. When you talked about like before about like what would Lysander Spooner and people like that. Also, I think a name you omitted, that I would add is Thomas Jefferson.
Oh yeah.
In the debates between and Jefferson, and when he supported strongly nullification, in 1800, in the early 1800s, Jefferson already thought the country was going in the wrong direction. So he already said, I wrote this Declaration of Independence. We fought this thing. We're now, post George Washington, John Adams was my good friend. He encouraged me to help write the Declaration of Independence. We were good buddies. And what does he do? He does this Alien and Sedition Acts. I understand we're a fragile nation, but we got to reinforce the principles that we founded this nation. And that we can't use this Federalist Party to start using executive power in this way. This is not what we talked about when we drafted the Declaration of Independence. When the Articles of Confederation were implemented. And even in the beginning of the Constitutional Convention, there was not really a sense that there should be a strong executive. We didn't get rid of one King George to replace it with another King George, just with a different last name. Right. So. So when you see all that, that's why Jefferson was a strong supporter of nullification. And he also thought that a flaw of the Constitution was that there was not a limited life to it, so that every generation would get to governed by a document that they directly consented to. And he also believed that also debt should not be passed through intergenerational. So he believed that debt should have a life of 16 or 19 years, and the same thing with the Constitution. I wonder if he and Madison woke up, whatever dispute they had about nullification, whether Madison might now change his mind and might be more enthusiastic about nullification, or would Madison say, what happened to my Constitution? Right. So, what happened to all the system and checks and balances? But ultimately, which I think is why the system will never change, is we think changing the actors in the system is the answer. We think if I just get this individual in, this individual is a solution to the problem. No, the problem is us. Okay. The problem is us until we look in the mirror and say, we're the problem. We're the problem because our expectations of government is too much, because we all want a free lunch. Okay, and we want the government to guarantee us this free lunch, and we'll keep electing people that want us to have a free lunch, and to the extent that we just want what we want the way we want it, and we're giving people who are giving us what we want, and then we end up not being satisfied because we don't get everything we want, so we want somebody else who will give us the thing the previous person didn't give us, and we're in a constant state of dissatisfaction. So because we expect so much from government, while we're willing to contribute so little. So what we want government to do is way more than our willingness to pay for it. So somebody else has got to pay for it, but we don't give consideration to who else is going to pay for that, because they're not alive, they have no say. So we're just going to pass the bill to them. So when how much, I know when I have this conversation with people about especially the debt, it resonates with almost no one. When I sit back and tell them, do you feel bad that basically, when we said no taxation without representation, you understand that every time you run a deficit, you're just taxing a future generation. Do you feel bad about it? Nobody I know feels bad about it. Have you met people that you have this conversation with that feel that there's who do they think is going to pay the debt, or do they not think about it? Is it a virtual thing to them? What is the experience you get when you talk about, our debt burden?
It's not great. I mean, unless you're talking to libertarians, right? But if you're talking to anyone else, it's a peripheral problem. It has nothing to do with what we're really dealing with. And there's really not, I think what's most interesting is there isn't much consideration for future generations. It's very much in the here and the now, and what makes me feel good about how I can vote right now. It's so impulse driven, and really just like, I think it comes down to, and this is a totally other aspect of my political and spiritual views, but I think there is such and I think it applies so extensively to politics, but there's such an avoidance of discomfort and difficult conversations, like real ones, not just surface level knee-jerk reaction outrage at sound bites and media clips, but actual, like, really hard conversations about what's actually required if you want solutions. And people don't want to go there because we've all been conditioned that you tap a screen or you make your little ballot decision and you've done your part. That's your civic duty. You did something, you said something, your vote is your voice. And it's drilled into us from elementary school. I know when I went to public school, that's what I learned. My civics education was I get to vote, and that means that I'm represented in government and we are the government and blah, 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 blah. And I think that when you have that as you're doing something, it's so easy to write off the real problems because that's somebody else's job. That's somebody else's problem and somebody else's, vote for it later, deal with it later. But it's so not considered a pressing issue, which is so crazy because it's like, well, I know Thomas Jefferson was warning about it. He tried to pay down the debt when he was president. It was like, oh my, I don't even know what the debt was, but it was such a crumb of what it is today. And people were freaking out about it back then. And I think it's a bit of a boiling frog thing where it just keeps rising and rising and rising. And it's so incremental that people don't see how truly awful it is. And I don't think they're getting a great math education. I don't think they're sitting around calculating the budget and the costs of these policies politicians are offering while also promising to lower the debt. Like, that's not going to happen. But it's a lot more comforting and a lot easier to just believe what they say and do your little part and tap the screen. And then you don't have to think about it. How's that on you? You did your part. You did your civic duty. You're a good citizen. All right, move along. That's how it feels to me.
And don't worry, whatever we're spending money on, we're not asking you to pay for.
Right. So, the billionaires will pay for it.
Yes, the billionaires will pay something for it and nobody else. So, but don't worry about the billionaires because while they're paying a few dollars in taxes, we're creating a cronyist system that we're creating more wealth for them that's non-taxable than the incremental income that is subject to taxation.
Right.
So we're trying to create all these ways where people can accrete wealth without paying tax. And I don't support a wealth tax, but we got to understand that's the deal with the wealthy. The deal with the wealthy is you're a crony. We'll ask you to pay a few bucks, not much more in taxes, a little more. We'll give you more tax benefits, but don't worry, we're going to give you all these regulations that'll protect your industries so you can create a lot more wealth, for yourself, and the incremental amount of taxes you'll be happy to pay because of how much more wealth we're creating you, not because of our lack of intervention, but because of our intervention on your behalf.
Yep.
So I mean, that's the game. The game is the government goes in and says, here's pay a little more in taxes, but don't worry, I'm going to do all these things to protect your interests. So your wealth goes up a lot. And as your wealth goes up a lot, don't worry, that part of it, you're not going to get taxed on. Yeah. So, hence like the big arguments that they had over, should carried interest be taxed for venture capital funds, for buyout funds, for people who basically don't put up any money and earn, who work at these, buyout funds, private equity funds, the fact that almost all the income they get are capital gains, because of the way the preferential tax code gives a preference over that. So that's not a product of a market process. That's a lobbying effort, to benefit one group. And to the extent that there's a big deficit out there, at the end, who's going to pay for that? That will be basically the wealthy people don't have enough money to pay for our $36 trillion deficit.
Yep.
And when I keep saying is if you have when I ask people say about this wealth tax, one is you'd have to think about how much wealth would evaporate with the wealth tax, because how many people would have to sell stuff, to fund the wealth tax, and how that would depress wealth, and how it would depress wealth creation. So the solution's got to be not figure out new ways of taxing income. The solution's got to be how we stop spending less, not taxing more. So how do we take people's freedom away? And have a society. Look, I was at this. A friend of mine funded this debate series. It used to be called Intelligence Squared. Now it's open to debate. So it was Oxford-style debates. So a friend of mine was the original funder of this. It was patterned after the British, the Oxford-style debates, and he basically brought it to the U.S. really, I like the system. I like the series. When I was in New York, I go to them when I'm in New York. They rebranded as Open to Debate. So one day he was hosting people who were donors of this and other affiliated people. So I was a minor donor to this, and so he invited me to his house for this thing. So I'm sitting next to some woman, and so we start a conversation, and she says, I said, what are your interests? She said, my interests are in human rights. I said, me too. I like human rights. So I like civil rights. I like human rights. So tell me, which of the rights are you most interested in? She said, healthcare rights. I
Oh,
said, could you tell me what healthcare rights there are? She said, yes, everybody's right to healthcare. So I said, can you explain how this works?
yeah,
Are you expecting all the doctors to basically go to medical school to offer their healthcare for free? No, I'm not. I'm not talking about that. Well, then I want to understand what the rights are. If
right,
I have a right to something, then that means the provider of it has an obligation. So if
right.
it's your right, is it the doctor's obligation? So I want to know. So she didn't want to answer.
Of
So
course.
I said, or is the answer you want me to help pay for other people's health care? So
Yeah,
you either want to coerce the doctor to have an obligation to provide free health care, or you basically think other people have an obligation to provide health care for people who are not members of their family, and they should basically have to take a percentage of their income and provide health care to everyone. So and that's a right. I said, I think you have I think normally a right is not a claim you have against somebody,
right.
against another person. So I said, Esther, can you define what a right is to you? Because
Yeah,
my understanding of rights is a right doesn't give you a claim, because you have a right against somebody else, a claim against somebody else.
hmm,
That give somebody else an equal right against you? So
right.
if you want to force me to pay for your health care, okay, what can I force you? Let me think about what I want to force you
Yeah,
to do for me.
right.
So she walked away from me. So I was very amused. But this is the problem that you have with these type of conversations. If you
Yeah,
ever ask people when they use a word
yeah,
to define the word, okay, then to see whether their own actions and thoughts are consistent with how they define their word,
right.
they will all then feel that they will not want to talk with you anymore, because you've exposed their hypocrisy, you've made
Right.
them feel uncomfortable, and they
Yep.
just walk away. So I take pride in doing it, though.
Yeah.
So I like making people feel uncomfortable who I think are just completely full of shit. I mean, the people who are apathetic, they I can tolerate because they don't just give a shit about anything.
Right.
So at least they're not a hypocrite. It's the people who have these really passion on
Yeah.
a topic,
Yeah.
where they have not given real serious thought to it.
Right.
So I don't like that people have strong opinions, with little to back up their opinions. It's,
Right.
like it's uncollateralized. They're fiat opinions. They're opinions backed by nothing. So I don't respect fiat opinions.
Oh,
If
I
I
like
listen
that. I'm
to a
going to
good
start using
argument,
that.
if I listen to a good argument, I respect a good argument. But a fiat opinion, no, I
Yeah.
have I have no respect for fiat opinions.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about that, I mean, not fiat opinions, but I love you never know what challenging someone in that way is going to do. And maybe it won't, they may not get it the day that that confrontation happens, but however many years even down the road, they might hear something or something might happen in the news and they might remember that conversation you had with them and it might click out of nowhere. And I know this from personal experience because when I was in college, I had a teacher talking about how FDR's New Deal was just like, or no, it was how he saved the banks. And he was talking about how it was really based on nothing. He basically just told people to believe. And so they put their money back in. And then there was some semblance of stability. And I was so offended at the time because I was a progressive. I thought FDR had saved America and all those big government policies were what gave everyone blah, blah, blah. But I remember being so annoyed and upset. And maybe 5 years later, after I started listening to Ron Paul, I remembered that teacher and saying that. And it gave me such an expanded view of the history of America, because that was primarily what I studied. And it was just that little interaction. And at the time, I couldn't hear it at all. I remember the words, but it didn't resonate. I remember being triggered and offended and, oh, this guy must be a Republican, all my little internal narratives that didn't really originate with me. It was just my programming. But 5 years later, I remembered. And to this day, I still remember. And I think of that guy fondly. I'm like, wow, thank you for challenging my assumptions and challenging what I believe to be true. And maybe you don't get to see the payoff for it, but I bet that it happens sometimes.
Have you impacted your parents' view of the world in any way?
I think so. I think so. It's fun. They're an older generation, and I think they still like much of their memory is of a time where it at least appeared more representative in America, when things were a little more prosperous and government wasn't as openly corrupt, like when Watergate was shocking and offensive to people. But I think when we really sit down and have, forget my videos because they know me personally. So when they see me in my videos, they're like, oh, I don't like this girl. Get her out. I think it jars them a little bit because I have so much sass. But when we're just sitting in real conversation, I think they're a lot more open to it. And if I just listen to their concerns instead of steamrolling them and telling them why they're wrong, if I just listen to their genuine concerns and then respond from a place of like acknowledging those concerns instead of telling them they're stupid and maybe offering a different solution or a different perspective on them, they're very open to it. Honestly, I'm lucky because I know people who have just been like kicked out of the family for beliefs like mine, where they're just not welcome anymore. And I think a big reason I do what I do is my parents. I remember them being so supportive when I was younger of just like be free, basically. I mean, within reason, but like they always supported the idea that I was an individual who had power in the world and not like government power, but I had the ability to do something, and they encouraged that. And I'm so grateful they did, because I think had I been raised in a different way, maybe I wouldn't have gone down this road.
And what is it like socializing in California with people who see your videos and know you are, and you ever talk politics with them? And what's the experience like for you?
Well, as I mentioned when we first started talking, when I first started, I was pretty mean and condescending. So I lost all the friends who disagreed with me. Like most of my friends are pretty like-minded now, but not, we don't all have the exact same views, but I think it's like, they know my intentions. They know that I'm really sincere about it. And so it's nice to talk to people who, maybe we disagree on one thing or the other, but there's a general understanding of like sincere intentions and genuine curiosity. Like I love to learn. I love to know more about how the world works. And I love things that challenge what I believe, because it then challenges me to think more deeply about it and maybe come up with better arguments and better solutions and better counters or whatever. But overall in LA, there's this, well, it depends. If you go to just a random yoga studio the day after Trump wins an election, it's a nightmare. That's the last place I want to be. I heard that in 2016, people were wearing all black to their meditation classes the day after Trump won, like that. Oh my God, get me away from that. I can't deal with the liberal ego. It's so big. But there are a lot of people here who are more willing to be skeptical and question. And so you do run into all kinds of really interesting people here with really different beliefs. Like it is predominantly liberal and it's a challenge, but overall there's a lot of people who are open-minded and open to questioning things more so than you would imagine in California.
Well, I like speaking with smart people who disagree with me.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way I'll discover the flaws in my logic.
Exactly.
So if somebody points a hole in something, where somebody says something to me where I say, gee, that's a good question. Answer, that makes me smarter. Yep. So, I like to have conversations where I think a product of my conversation is that I walk away smarter, which means I'd rather speak to people who disagree with me, who are smart, than people who agree with me. I don't need to hear an echo chamber.
Yeah.
What I much prefer is speaking to a smart person who will give me an explanation on why they think I'm completely wrong.
Yeah.
And I can listen carefully, and I either can make a judgment. These are interesting points. They're interesting points because he has a different worldview, or they're interesting points because there's a flaw in my logic, and then I gotta re-examine, the flaw, in my logic. I think that, Karl Popper said basically we can't prove anything true. We can just prove things false. So I'll never, so to prove that you're right to anyone is kind of an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is who can do an easier job of pointing out the flaws in your own logic. So and the better you are at pointing flaws out in other people's logic than them being able to point flaws at your logic is, you might not be able to convince somebody that you're right, but you might be able to then have people realize that they're wrong. And that might then open up to the possibility of something else.
Yeah.
So they might not agree with you, but at least it'll open them up to the possibility that there's some other explanation out there.
Exactly.
So, so I like I like when I have conversation with people and they can get me to think about something that I hadn't thought about, and that
Yeah.
made me saying, gee, maybe I'm wrong on this, and
Yeah,
and
right.
I got to give it more thought, or at least I get a different understanding of somebody who's thought about something, but who has just a different value system than me.
Right. Exactly.
So liberty is lower down in the list of priorities of what they expect, a civil society to be, and they might have a different attitude towards what we owe each other, and they might want to live in a society where people have more obligations to each other.
Right.
Whether that's in the Constitution or not, they don't
Right.
care. That's just the values today, and they think that the Constitution is just this document written by people over 200 years ago, that it's just a general guidebook, and we should just look at it that way. So we have disputes about how we can construct the Constitution. So
Yeah.
that it's really hard to have an argument other than just understand that people have a different opinion about the role of government.
Right.
But then then I always try and make it down to coercion. What do you have a right to do? That if you get enough of a mob to consent to it, you don't care whether my consent is given or not.
Right.
And then I try and bring it down to the consent issue. Also, like the point that you raised about earlier about like Obama and the cult of personality, and people's justification. You brought it in context of people justifying Trump not needing to go through Congress because that's the establishment,
Right.
and he's anti-establishment. So as an anti-establishment, because he's legitimately anti-establishment,
Right.
we will give him this break of doing these recess appointments because he's doing it for a good reason, as
Right.
opposed to an establishment person who will be doing it for bad reasons.
Right.
That's sort of like the logic that happened, which the Republicans let him get away with it, with the treaty that was not a treaty with the agreement that Obama executed with Iran. That probably should have been a treaty. When I spoke to people who I respect for their knowledge of the Constitution,
Yeah.
they felt that Obama was negotiating a treaty, but he didn't have the votes.
Mm.
They didn't have the supermajority necessary to pass a treaty. And even Kerry in an interview said, we can't do treaties in this country anymore because we can't get to that type of consent. Well, if we can't get that type of consent, instead of people saying, if we can't get that consent, why should we even be signing the document to begin with?
Right.
So, but nobody said that. Nobody
Right.
said,
Of course.
if we can't get to the consent, maybe we shouldn't do it. There's a reason why there's a process established that when we agree, that when we, Washington said in his farewell address, that we should basically not get involved in permanent alliances. Our relationship with the world should be predicated upon trade and commerce, and not necessarily forming alliances with people. So the intention was not to make it easy to form treaties, and if we did,
Right.
there should be a supermajority to approve it.
Yeah.
So that was the intention. So and clearly that was the intention.
Right.
So given the fact that's the intention, somebody says, well, that's the intention. Well, let's not do any treaties anymore, but let's treat it like a treaty. Well, we know it's not a treaty just because we can't get the consent. A treaty, So I say, the president's goal is either to convince the public that a supermajority should give consent to this because it's that valuable to the nation, and if they haven't been able to get that type of consent, then they should have the humility to say, I couldn't convince the people. I didn't get their consent.
Right.
So in the absence of that consent, I'm not going to do anything. So how do you think? I mean, for me, I like to bring it down to the not of policies, but what should the government do that requires consent of the governed?
Right.
So do you have many conversations getting it down to the concept of consent itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like to go right to that because I think that's really fundamentally what it's all about and at the root of so much of the dysfunction and injustice. And what's interesting is that most people, when you take them down the line of questioning about is government consensual or not, if you talk about taxation or you talk about, say, an unpaid parking ticket and all the threats they make on you, when you give them like a tangible example of the fact that government is inherently non-consensual, they can go with that. They get that. They understand it. But then there's some little leap or gap in the logical ability that goes, yeah, but this is how it is. Therefore, I have to operate within this system. And so it's like they can even acknowledge that the system it's not in alignment with their values, with their morals, which I think it's pretty moral to say, okay, I don't own you. I can't force you to do anything that you don't want to do. That seems pretty easy. And most people will agree with that. But there's this little flip that switches when you're talking about government and when people feel like because we're going up against the programming, right? The programming is that I am the government. I think Theodore Roosevelt is credited with saying that first, but it's such a common sentiment. I am the government. We are the government. And I think it's really hard to get people to reject that part of their identity because it's a part of their identity. So if you were to acknowledge that, hey, the system that I was taught my whole life represents me and is virtuous and serves the people and upholds civilization, to learn then that actually that's not true. And maybe the opposite is true, that actually it creates more uncivilization, that it's actually quite barbaric and savage. I don't know that people it's hard to work through that with people because it's so core to their sense of self.
Very well said. Very well said. So tell me, what are the things, or tell everyone else who might, be listening now or watching this now or who will watch it later, what are the things you would have liked me to have asked that you didn't, that because you would like to say that I didn't get a chance to say, so that you can so that I always give my guests the last word. And in addition, I would like you to make it clear how people can find you and talk about your Substack and because I would like to find your Substack and make a donation to the Substack.
Oh, thank you.
I want to support your content. So
thank you very much.
So go ahead and all the questions I should have asked that I didn't, and all the things you want to say that I didn't get an opportunity to say, now's your time to do so.
Great. Well, I think there's only one thing, and I love to talk about this always. And it's something that I didn't believe when I first started. It wasn't really a priority for me, but in the years I've been doing this work, something I have seen and I just believe more and more every day is that I think a big root of this dysfunction, aside from the statism, obviously, and the coercion and like the lie of the entire system, that's established. We know this. But I think a lot of that is exacerbated by people's inner suffering that we don't know how to deal with. We don't know how to be with how hard it is to be human. And when I look at the herd behavior, the behavior of the masses, they're so whipped up. They're so anxious. They're so afraid. They're so angry. There's a lot of dysregulation in the average individual person. And then that transfers into the crowd, into the collective and the herd. And so something for me that I didn't think about at all when I started making videos, and you can see it in my tone. When I first started making videos, I was so much meaner and angrier, and I'm still quite sassy, so I've toned it down. But I've had to learn to find ways to cultivate peace within myself. Because we can talk about how we don't want coercion, initiating violence is wrong. And, there's a natural order to a free market, to true freedom, the way that it's spontaneous order. But we don't have that within ourselves. Most of us are living in absolute inner turmoil and chaos. And so I think that I would like to see our inner worlds start to match the outer worlds we want to cultivate. And I say this as someone who, this is my daily work. I have to do this for myself. So I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm not further along than anyone, but I really think if we want individual freedom, I think it doesn't just apply to the external world. I think it applies so much to how we experience life day to day and moment to moment. And I write about that on my Substack. So it's in my intro post, and I'm going to be writing a lot of articles that touch on that. Because to me, it seems like such an obvious connection. I mean, you see the way people melt down over Trump's victory, or, the way they're like overjoyed and they're euphoric over Trump's victory. There's such a dependence of our emotional state on what happens in government. And I think that there's a really interesting connection there that I don't think is well known, because in general, people are very disconnected from that part of being human. So I love to talk about that. I'll be on that soapbox forever. And you can find my Substack at pleasuretoburn.substack.com. And you can find me, Carey Wedler, pretty much on every platform, including BitChute. I'm new to BitChute, so I'm glad to be there. And it's CareyWedler. It's hard.
I'd like to ask you a question then from what you said.
Yeah.
Do you think these platforms, I hate to call them social media because I don't find them very social.
Yeah.
But, I think it's more anti-social media. The struggles that we have within ourselves.
Yeah.
You think that these quote social media platforms have exacerbated or made it better, or have had no impact on people?
Ooh, I don't think they've made it better. I mean, I guess sometimes if you can make friends and find community, I think there's value in that. But I think they're either revealing something that has long been true or they are exacerbating it. Because something I like to ask people is like, how do you feel when you're scrolling? What does it actually feel like in your body? Do you feel calm and open and at peace? Or do you feel like a tension in your chest and a gripping and this sense of urgency? Because that's how I feel when I go on social media. And one of my struggles is like, okay, well, we're not waking up and going right on social media. That's a boundary I've had to set for myself, because if I do that, I'm activated all day. There's like this little agitation. There's this frantic quality to it. And I think that really, and I think it's designed that way. Really, I mean, they have people who work at these companies who their job is to find ways to get you more hooked in and more addicted and clicking and looking for your likes and refreshing and scrolling. And I think that's very agitating for your nervous system. I mean, forget about like blue light and, and the constant stimulation, just that dynamic, the craving and the needing, the validation. I think that feeds some really unfortunate habits in society.
Yeah, I think that's why, principally in both my involvement previously with Parler and now with BitChute, I have been a strong advocate that there should be no algorithms.
Yeah.
That everything should evolve organically, and that there should be no manipulation, and any manipulation is basically dishonest. So I guess it would be somewhat honest if at least the form of manipulation, the algorithms used, were transparent. At least there'd be some integrity to the process.
Yeah.
But when they're not straightforward, when they're not honest, and there's a manipulation going back to Edward Bernays and the attempt to be able to control a narrative through how you algorithmically manipulate content. And I think you're right. Ultimately, what makes these platforms valuable is engagement.
Yep.
And so whatever gets engagement up, is what's promoted. So, it's not necessarily looking for a healthy conversation.
Right.
It's looking to get people to stay engaged. And, back when I was affiliated with Parler, I used the term engagement by or through enragement.
Yeah, exactly.
Engaged by keeping them enraged, and if you keep feeding the rage, you'll keep them engaged.
Yep.
And so I don't like that form of manipulation. And we say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, yet the platforms where people interact most, have no sunlight because they have no transparency.
Yep.
So how content is being suppressed, why it's being suppressed, what's given priority over other, nobody has any idea. And yet this is where most conversations are occurring. So I'm glad you're using all platforms, because we should try and reach all audiences. But I really I feel very strongly about this issue about platforms that don't. Every platform should publish, to the extent that they have algorithms that are manipulate content.
Yeah.
That they should publish them, and if they don't publish them, they're being dishonest. But apparently, given the fact that they're successful in the marketplace, people are okay with that dishonesty. But then the question again goes back to the point made, is how much is this? Do we got to look at ourselves and say, we're okay with this?
Yep.
So you made a decision to have understanding that you could figure out what the masses want to hear,
right,
and produce the content, and you'd have more followers. But you've not chosen that route. You've chosen the route to be authentic, in a world where the authenticity actually is not rewarded. So
sadly, yeah.
And then going back to the individual, what are our individual needs? That we kind of rejected authenticity because we feel that we need whatever it is, reinforcement that we need from ourselves and from other people, and what we don't get sufficiently within ourselves. It's just I really like your words. I try and tell people that when I have conversations with them, where I express my point of view, I say, never. Why did we have to argue? I mean, you're expressing your point of view, I'm expressing mine. I'm expressing my point of view, not to convince you, but to explain to you why I see the world.
Yeah.
And hopefully all you get out of this is a better understanding of me.
Right.
You don't have to convince me, and I don't need to convince you.
Yeah.
The conversation will let me understand you better, and it'll
Yep.
let you understand me better. So we don't have to be disagreeable, because
Yeah.
my goal is not to convince you of anything.
Right.
So, other than hopefully to have a little more understanding of me, and you'd hope that I would want to have a little more understanding of you, but I don't have to be so judgmental of you, and you don't have to be so judgmental of me. But then I always add to the fact is, really, I have a right of more judging you than you have judging me, because nothing I want is coercive against you.
Right.
Things you
Exactly.
want are coercive against me. So I said, I really have a right to judge you more than you have a right to judge me, but I still choose not to judge you. So even though I have more of a right to do so, because I make no claim against you while you make a claim against me.
Yeah.
So I like to always reinforce that point. So, but you're very articulate.
Oh, thank you.
When as I said, when I first got exposed to your first article, it made me want to get to know anti-media, and the
Aw.
concept of anti-media, was very, very interesting to me. And it's good that here we are almost 5 years later, and at least we get an opportunity to know each other a little bit. And I wish you really great success. I'm very happy that you're putting content up on BitChute, and I hope a lot of people pay attention to your
Oh,
content.
thank you. And
Really,
thanks for having me. It's
really great stuff.
yeah, it's always great to talk to people with interesting perspectives, and I can tell you've got a lot going on in your brain. There's a lot of wisdom in there. So it's a pleasure to talk to you and hear a little bit. I'd love to hear some stories about your time in Chicago sometime.
Sure, we can with if through Johnny, we could exchange information, and I'm
Sure.
happy to give you my mobile phone number, and we can text and chat. And if there's anything in the future, where you say, I wrote this and I'd really like an opportunity talking about it again, just let me know, and I'm happy to have you back anytime you
Cool.
have something specific that you'd like to talk about. And I'm happy to have you back to give you the opportunity of talking about it, and here with me and the BitChute community, and anything you want to talk about offline. We can exchange information and continue the conversation. I would
Sounds
love
great.
that.
Cool. Thank you. And thanks for reaching out all those years ago. I'm so sorry I missed you.
Well, better late than never, as they say.
Right.
Well, you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much,
You
Carey.
too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.